Okay, so when we talk about human resource development evaluation, it can also be captioned or rephrased as training evaluation. And what happens in human resource development evaluation is that the HRD interventionists try to collect information on the training outcomes to ascertain whether the training that was disseminated and was implemented ended up being effective or not. So definitionally, it can be defined as the systematic collection of descriptive and judgmental information necessary to make effective training decisions relating to selection, adoption, value, and modification of various instructional activities. So this indicates that in an attempt to collect information or feedback on training outcomes, there is some level of systematicity to it. It means you don't have to, you shouldn't go about the collection of information haphazardly. There should be some rhythm or plan or coordination to how you go about the collection of the information. And if you take a sober look at this definition by Werner and Desimoni, three things are worthy of noting. And the first one is that in an attempt to evaluate an HRD program, we pay attention to both descriptive and judgmental information. Now, you realize that I've highlighted some of the words in the entirety of the text. So when you are reading, you have to pay attention to those kind of bolded information. It is for emphasis sake, especially the quizzes that you'll be doing. At the end of the day, I expect you to master some concepts. So when you're reading, pay attention to all those things. Now, so when we say the evaluative process must end up collecting descriptive and judgmental information, what does it mean? Descriptive information is just like what you did in your research methods or quantitative methods. So in there we are referring to the extent to which you can use some amount of novelty to create a comprehensive picture of what happened during the training process. Okay, so when we talk about the descriptive information, we expect you to provide a picture of what happened or what has happened during the training process. So it is actually a tool that can help you to summarize the happenings during the training process. Conversely, the judgmental information aspect of the evaluative exercise also provide information which communicates one's opinion or belief about the picture that was previously created. So we are saying that whereas the descriptive information helps you to get a holistic picture of what happened or ensued during the training process, the judgmental component of the information gathering helps you to also make some sort of meaning out of the picture you created. So these are some examples to illustrate and also juxtapose the descriptive information from the judgmental information as far as the definition by Desimoni and Werner is concerned. So we are looking at the descriptive one. An example is when you say 25% of first line supervisors attended a budgeting workshop in the last year. You are just creating a picture about what we call the descriptive information, because you are trying to ascertain in this particular statement how many of the first line supervisors took part in the training program. The same can be said about this particular statement. When you say 20% fewer supervisors attended this workshop than the previous 12 months. In this circumstance, you are trying to describe the percentage of workshop supervisors who took part in the workshop seminar that was recently conducted. Now, let's compare these statements with the one on the next slide. Assuming you also make a statement after gathering your evaluative information that the turnout for a budgeting workshop over the last 6 months is disappointingly low as compared to last year's turnout. Over here, because you've introduced this caption of disappointingly low, we say you are making a judgment or you are making a meaning out of the figures that were ascertained during the descriptive analysis. So prior to the judgmental information, we are just talking about the percentage of people that took part in the intervention. But we are now trying to go further to interpret the facts, which is the percentage. Does that percentage communicate something which is substantial, or it is something which is nothing to write home about? So the moment you try to make an interpretation of the descriptive statistics, then we say you are making, you are trying to communicate judgmental information. Now, the second thing which is worthy to note from the definition by Werner and Desmone is that the evaluation involves a systematic collection of information according to a predetermined plan to ensure the information is appropriate and useful. So this second component of the definition also tries to communicate that in an attempt to conduct an HRD evaluation, there should be a clearly thought through plan that will guide your evaluative process or the information gathering process. In other words, if you fail to plan on how you will evaluate the trainees or employees, depending on the circumstance you find yourself, then you will also find yourself wanting in terms of how you make good use of the information. You might even end up not getting quality information, which will help you to draw copious conclusions. So the systematicity component of the definition is also important. Now, the last component of the definition, which I want you to pay attention to, is that when the evaluation is conducted, it helps a lot of stakeholders in an organization, and these include the managers, the employees themselves who took part in the HRD intervention, and the HRD professionals who will be perhaps administering the intervention or using it to make futuristic decisions. And this is important because from the outset, you will have to be convincing managers to pump huge sums of money to fund the HRD or the training program. You will also be churning out a lot of information to convince and incentivize employees to participate in it. Then you will also be either buying or developing the program in-house. So at the end of the day, assessing the efficacy of the training program or the HRD intervention will help you in also making some future decisions in terms of whether to adopt it wholesale as you did previously, or there is the need for you to modify it. And all these stakeholders will also be experiencing its usefulness in different respects. Okay. Now, the purpose of HRD evaluation. So indirectly, I have touched on a few of them, but there is the need for us to also go through what Philip 2002 admonishes as far as evaluation of HRD programs are concerned. Now, according to Phillips 2002, the first purpose that HRD evaluations tend to serve is that it helps to ascertain whether a training program was successful. And when we say the evaluation of the training program helps us to know whether it was successful or not. It means that we are able to compare the outcome of the program with the objectives that was set from the outset to see whether we've been able to accomplish it or we deviated from it. And if it was accomplished, it has its own repercussions on our future adoption of similar HRD interventions. And if it was unsuccessful, it becomes imperative that we learn from the mistakes that cropped up and so on and so forth, so that we'll be able to fill such gaps in future interventions. Now, the second purpose of an HRD evaluative intervention is that it also helps you to identify the strengths and weaknesses of the program. Now, so this is closely akin to the initial explanation I provided. Whereas you are able to ascertain the degree to which you accomplish the objectives, you will also be in a position to verify which aspect of the program went well and which aspect did not go well. So being privy to such information, you'll be in a good position to maximize your strengths whilst you work on your weaknesses in order to get a better program in the future. Now, the third one is also helping you to ascertain what we call the cost-benefit ratio. And don't forget, the acceptance and implementation of the HRD intervention is usually fueled by the financial muscle of your organization. So you must have convinced your managers to put or pump a lot of money into it. And you must have also convinced them to perhaps buy or develop it in-house. At the end of the day, if we compare the cost that was involved in designing and implementing the program to the benefits that is accruing to the organization, the employees, and the other stakeholders in the organization, we should be able to get favorable outcomes as far as the trade-off between the cost and the benefits is concerned. So in there, we are looking at issues like return on investment. The amount of money that was pumped into the program, are we getting returns for it? So those are the questions that this third point will help to clarify. And usually when the outcome in terms of the benefits outweighs the cost, then it will incentivize the organization to continue implementing such program in the near future. However, if the cost is outweighing the benefit, then it will be a disincentive for the program to continue running, unless, of course, new modifications are made to it to make it more rational and appropriate. Then the fourth purpose, according to Phillips 2002, is that it helps to identify which stakeholders or participants in your organization benefited most or least from the program. You all agree with me that even though you might be working at the same department or in the same organization, your learning curve differs. And so whereas a particular intervention might be very much appropriate for certain categories of employees, it might not be yielding favorable results for other categories of employees. So it is this evaluation outcome that will help us to adduce this kind of information, and then we will rely on it to make judicious implementation of future HRD interventions. Then the last one is that the information that we will get from the evaluation will help us to establish a database which will assist management in making decisions in terms of whether in future we should use the same project or we should vary it, or whether we should develop it in-house or we should buy it, whether we should get the professionals who will be administering the intervention from an outsourcing or an outside establishment, or it should be coming from in-house, and so on and so forth. So the information that will be deduced from the evaluation will become a core component of our database that will be used in making future decisions. Now, research indicates that there are two main types of training evaluations. Or when you talk about HRD evaluations, it falls in two main typologies. We have the formative evaluation and then the summative evaluation. Once again, I will entreat you to pay attention to the bolded test. When you are reading through, pay keen attention to them for the purpose of the quizzes that you'll be doing. So a distinction can be made between the formative and the summative evaluations. Whereas the formative evaluations are usually conducted prior to or when the training program is implemented, the summative evaluations are usually conducted at the end of the HRD intervention. So let me take that part again. In terms of the typologies of HRD evaluations, there are two main types. We have what we call the formative and then the summative evaluations. Now, when we talk about the formative evaluations, it simply means that those are the sort of evaluations we conduct when we are forming the HRD intervention or when we are actually administering the HRD intervention. So those are the formative ones. Now, the summative ones are the sort of tests or tools we use when we finish conducting the HRD intervention and we want to find out whether it was successful or not. So it is conducted at the end of the HRD intervention. Now, let me bring it back to the, your experiences as students. So in the course of the semester, I have conducted, I think, one quiz, and I've also administered 2 assignments. These assignments occurred, some occurred at the beginning of the semester, others also occurred somewhere in the middle of the semester. I think one was conducted last week. Those sort of assessments are what we call formative because they help to shape the lecturing process or the training process I am trying to administer, so that by the time we get to the end of the semester, I must have worked on your deficits or the challenges that you are encountering based on the feedback I'm getting from you. So that would be a typical example of a formative evaluation. Still in the classroom, when we talk about summative evaluation, a typical example could be end of semester examination or a term paper, which is conducted after we've completed all the course coverage for the semester. Another example could be the evaluation that you administer for your lectures. That will be a type of summative evaluation. All right. So let me try and see if I've left anything out. The formative evaluation takes place during program design. So as you are designing the program, you must be thinking about how best deficits that will crop up can be corrected. And so very soon we'll be looking at specific typologies of evaluative designs. In terms of development, you must also be thinking about how you'll be interspersing the various tests or tools with the HRD intervention or the training process, so that the trainees will be able to make good use of the training program they are going through, and so on and so forth. And we say that the formative evaluation together encompass tools that identify misconceptions, struggles, and learning gaps along the way, and they also assess how to close such gaps. So prior to the commencement of a particular HRD intervention, the trainees might be having a lot of misconceptions. They might be having their own perceptions about how things are supposed to be, and so on and so forth. And they might be having their own peculiar challenges from their various places of work. Now, the formative evaluation helps to shape and correct some of these misconceptions and some of these deficits, so that by the time they get to the end of the program, those deficiencies might have been corrected. So we say it helps to ensure that the training program is well organized and runs smoothly. And at the end of the day, we expect the trainees or the learners to get the maximum satisfaction from it in an attempt to identify and fill the gaps that they will be experiencing. So it provides information about how to make the program better, and some of the tools that are used in collecting, in gathering this particular data include quizzes, essays, case studies, presentations, role plays, and so on and so forth. And depending on the issue you want to evaluate, you might end up gathering qualitative or quantitative data. So for instance, if you ask trainees to demonstrate a knowledge they have acquired in front of you through role plays, it means that you will be observing them as they act it out, and you'll be giving feedback based on how you think they should have performed. That will be more of a qualitative in nature. Now, if you ask students to participate, trainees or employees to participate in quizzes, at the end of the day, it will be scored for them to know whether they have passed or failed. And in that regard, you'll be generating quantitative data. So those are the main avenues where the data can be collected. And when we say the formative evaluation can also be used in designing and developing the HRD intervention, a typical example could be pilot testing. So in pilot testing, what happens is that you preview the HRD intervention with potential trainees or potential stakeholders for them to give you feedback so that you can improve upon the final one that you will be implementing. You realize that once you do proper pilot testing, at the end of the day, you'll be in a good position to identify the strengths of the current program you have in place and its weaknesses, so that you address them quickly before you implement them to a larger target audience. So that was the formative evaluation. Let's quickly look at summative evaluation. And like I mentioned earlier on, summative evaluation usually takes place after the HRD intervention has been implemented. So typical example would be an end of semester exam. Now, summative evaluation determines the extent to which trainees have changed as a result of participating in the training program. So to what extent have the trainees' cognition, attitude, and behavior changed as a result of their going through or participating in the HRD intervention? Once you are interested in this, then we are doing summative evaluation. And it also involves collecting evidence of trainees' key essays and their proficiency. So to what extent have they acquired knowledge, skills, and to what extent have their proficiency improved or become better than their prior entry into the program. And it may include measuring the monetary benefits that the company receives from the program. So return on investment. Is the company getting returns on the money they invested in the administration of the HRD intervention? And in there are some few computations, but you are not HR students or business students, so there is no need. But what happens when we are doing ROI is that you basically subtract the costs of the program from the benefits, then you divide it over the cost times 100. That will give you a percentage or an approximation of whether you are making some gains or you are making some loss in terms of investing in the HRD intervention. And based on that outcome, it might incentivize the future availability of such program, especially if you are not getting value for money, then it wouldn't make any rational sense to be still pumping money into it, unless you address some of the challenges that can help you to get more gains. And of course, it also involves collecting quantitative and qualitative data, just like the formative one. This one could also be quantitative or qualitative, but depending on the design you are using, you might use quizzes, you might use end of term papers, you might use term papers, or you might even use presentations to give them feedback and so on and so forth. Now, so I have been talking so far about what HRD evaluation is and the various typologies. We are now going to look at a framework that can guide your evaluative process. If you quite remember, in the definition, I indicated that in an attempt to assess training outcomes through the evaluation, there must be some sort of systematicity to it. And this systematicity must be deliberately structured and programmed so that you can get useful results that can be used in making futuristic decisions. There are several models or frameworks that can be adopted to guide how you go about your HRD evaluation. But for the purpose of this class, I'll be introducing you to the Kirkpatrick's evaluating model. Kirkpatrick's evaluation model. Later on, you can read about the ROI, this one. The ROI by Phillips. It is quite similar to the Kirkpatrick's, but it involves quite some amount of calculations. And for IT students, I wonder if you will really need it. But for the Kirkpatrick one, it gives you some generic framework that you can rely on to make good use and good evaluations of the training program. And it is actually construed as the most popular and influential framework when it comes to training evaluation. So of all the evaluations that currently exist, the Kirkpatrick one is rated as the one which is very much popular and influential. And it is so because it is quite easy to use. So in terms of user-friendly, people find it more convenient when they are adopting the philosophy behind it to apply. Now, the basic tenets of the Kirkpatrick model is that evaluation of an HRD intervention can be done based on 4 generic parameters. So Kirkpatrick is simply saying that for you to know whether your HRD intervention you administered was successful or not, you can use 4 main criteria to determine it. And what are these criteria? Once again, you've seen that I've highlighted them over here. It is not for the beautification of it. These are reaction, learning, behavior, and results. So these are the 4 generic parameters that Kirkpatrick advocates, that it can give you a comprehensive feedback on whether your HRD intervention was successful or not. Now, in terms of reaction, and he construes reaction to be the first level of the evaluating process. At the reaction level, the HRD interventionist is primarily interested in verifying whether the trainees like the program or they feel that it was worth participating in the HRD intervention. So if, for instance, this particular course that you are taking, I want to get your reaction that whether you think it is useful for IT students to be doing HRD. That would be a reactive evaluation, according to Kirkpatrick. And research indicates that the reaction evaluation, that is the first level one, it helps to get the initial impression of the trainees before they actually even start participating in the training program. In the same vein, it also helps you to get a quick feedback from the trainees to see whether they are satisfied with the intervention that was administered. So positive reactions to a training program may make it easier to encourage employees to attend future programs. So if at the end of the program, the reactions you are getting from the trainees, in this circumstance, perhaps the employees, is positive, then you can be guaranteed that they are likely to even recommend it to other people who might find the program useful. Conversely, if the trainees do not like the program or they think they didn't learn anything, or even if they did, they may discourage others from attending it. So basically, if they give you an impression or a reaction that they are dissatisfied with what they receive, then you are rest assured that under no circumstance will they recommend the program to others. And so the first level, which is the reaction, is very, very important as far as the evaluation process is concerned. Now, in terms of its limitation, research indicates that because the feedback is coming from only the trainees or those who took part in the training program, the reaction is necessary but not sufficient for you to make conclusive, for you to make a conclusion that the training was successful or not. In other words, the development and implementation of the training program was perhaps managed by several stakeholders. And even though the trainees are the end recipients of it, it will not be prudent for you to use their opinion alone as the basis of evaluating the outcome of the training program. So there is the need for you to go beyond the trainees. The second level of evaluation is what Kirkpatrick considers to be learning. And by learning, we are referring to the degree to which the trainees learned the HRD objectives that was coined in terms of the training materials and whether they are actually making good use of it. So basically, we are trying to find out whether the objective which took a center stage of the HRD intervention has been achieved by way of the trainees learning to assimilate the objectives. Now, the learning can be assessed or ascertained through quizzes or tests. So the moment you administer some form of test or exercise and you get feedback from the trainees or the participants that they are all scoring high, then it means that some sort of learning has taken place. At least they have assimilated the content of the HRD intervention into their long-term memory. In the same vein, the moment you administer a test and all the participants are scoring lower marks, then it means that there is more to be desired and there is more room for improvements. So the learning component of the Kirkpatrick's evaluative framework will help you to know whether the objectives of the HRD intervention has been assimilated by the trainees. Now, the third level is what Kirkpatrick conceptualized as behavior. So in there, we are moving away from the mere commitment of the mere assimilation of information into the memory, but to something which is more practical and which can be overtly observed. So some of the questions we try to ask here to ascertain whether behavior has improved or worsened is, does the trainee use what they learned in training back on the job? So whatever they learned during the training program, are they using it when they got back onto the job? Now, quickly, who can tell me what this means? When we say, does the trainee use what was learned in training back on the job? In HRD, what does it signify? Someone should try for me to see. Yes. Alex. Deny Holmes. Deny on mute. When we say does the trainee use what was learned in training back on the job, what does it signify in the field of HRD? Hey, no one.
Yes. Sir.
Okay, yeah, Alex, go on.
Hello, sir.
Learning has taken place.
No, that wouldn't suffice. Asamoah, go on.
Yeah, so I think that does the trainee use what was learned in the training back on the job, which means that after the training, does the trainee actually use what was learned in his field of work?
Very good. And how do we conceptualize that in the field of HRD? This one, we did it in, I think, lecture. Is it lecture 2 or so?
Is it a near transfer?
You are close, but...
Hello, sir.
Yes, it's what? Okay, I can see...
Power transfer.
Sure. Richard, you can talk.
Sir, it's positive transfer.
You are all close. You are all close.
It's not positive.
Yeah, look at it again. It's just a question. Does the trainee use what was learned in training back on the job? Hey, I deal with next week. Maybe I come away,
Sir.
Yes, who is speaking?
Sir, Richard from Kumasi.
Yeah, Richard. What will it be?
Sir, yes, he applies it to the job.
Yes, so he applies it to the job, but how do we conceptualize it? That is what I mean.
By giving them tasks based on what they've learned.
Come again, by giving them
a task based on what they learned.
No, but you see, what you are all doing now is that you are trying to explain the question. But I'm saying that question then, what does it conceptualize?
The transfer of training.
Transfer of training. Who mentioned it?
Richard Waro.
Richard. Okay. Richard, you have 1 mark. Okay, remind me later.
At least I can get half.
No, Masa.
Oh.
So Richard, remind me later. The moment you start talking about positive, negative, zero transfer, you are talking about specific types of transfer, but I don't know why it's here. Okay, it's here. Anyway, so at least let's make progress, and it's good you are all learning now. The behavior component here signifies transfer of training. To what extent can we ascertain whether the trainees are transferring what they learned during the implementation of the HRD intervention onto their job? And it is important to note that in assessing the behavior, there is the need for us to pay attention to its relative permanence. In other words, if the trainees are able to transfer onto the job 1 week after the HRD intervention, but after, let's say, a month or two, they forget it, then it means there is a decay of memory here, and they need to go back and sharpen it. So that is what I meant by relative permanence. Now, the last one is what we call results. The level 4 is results, according to Kirkpatrick. And the results component basically helps the HRD interventionist to ascertain whether the HRD efforts or initiatives have resulted in an improvement in the organization's effectiveness and efficiency. So in there, we are not only looking at the impacts of the training intervention on the specific employees, but we are looking at how the employees' concerted efforts will also result in favorable results for the organization as a whole. So in terms of their profitability and the efficiency with which they deliver their objectives. Now, this indicates that at this point in time, we will be interested in doing the return on investment. So to what extent is the cost that was incurred in administering the HRD intervention compared to the benefits that is accruing from the implementation of the HRD intervention. And the ROI calculations will become imperative when you get to the level 4, which is results. So basically, these are the 4 parameters that Kirkpatrick admonishes to suffice in evaluating an HRD intervention. Okay. Can you still see my screen?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Good. So what are you seeing now?
Yes, sir.
Good. So we are now on training, the training designs, training evaluation designs. If you quite remember, in an attempt to define what training evaluation is, I indicated that it has to be done carefully and systematically so that you end up making good use of the information and you also be able to interpret it appropriately. To do this, the evaluation must also be designed in a manner that will be more useful. So when we talk about the design of a training program, and I say the design of an evaluating program, it means that we are either now about to commence the training program and we are thinking through how we will best identify the inadequacies of our participants and correct them. Or we are also envisaging how, after administering the HRD intervention, we will assess the success or failure of the HRD intervention. Is that clear? So when we talk about the evaluation design, of HRD program. It simply refers to the strategy that can be adopted to collect information on the training outcome to certify its efficacy. And this strategy is usually implemented from the outset. So it will be at the point where you are now designing the training program so that you will intersperse it with some breaks and recurring quizzes or some sort of test. Or depending on the background of the trainees, you might decide to do the summative one where you will do it at the end of the program. There are several types of evaluation designs. So for the purpose of this class, because you are IT students, I'll be limiting you to just 3. And I'm pretty sure you might have come across some of these things when you were doing your research methods, particularly in experimental designs. Or maybe when you were doing your quanti, you might have come across repeated measures. So these are some of the things that we'll be looking at. So the 3 that I'll be introducing you to are the post-test only design, the pre-test post-test design, the pre-test post-test with comparison groups. Beyond this, you can also have the Solomon 4 comparison groups. You can also have time series. Sometimes you can even get interrupted time series, and so on and so forth. So let's pick them one by one. Now, when we say we are adopting an evaluation design, which is known as post-test only design, it simply implies that in our attempt to ascertain the efficacy of the HRD intervention, we are only going to adopt a summative test. This means that in the course of delivering the HRD intervention, we will not be testing the knowledge and the skills and proficiency of the trainees, but we will only do it at the end of the program. Okay, so it means that only post-training outcomes are collected, and that is the long and short of all that I was saying. And it's usually appropriate when trainees can be expected to have similar levels of knowledge, behavior, and results or outcomes prior to the training. So when you think you are dealing with a cohort that have comparable background, they are at the same pedestal, or there are no significant differences in terms of their KSs, then you can adopt the post-test only. And it means that, so let me use this class I'm handling, for instance. If I decide to use post-test only evaluation design to assess this class, it means that the entire semester we will not conduct any quiz, we will not conduct any assignments, we will not do even mid-sem, but we will only do end of semester examination. That will be a typical example of post-test only design. And this signifies that the test is only conducted after the administration of the HRD intervention. Now, the second one is what we call the pre-test, post-test evaluation design. And some books also conceptualize it as repeated measures or before-after intervention design. So it's the pre-test, post-test design try to address some of the challenges or inadequacies of the post-test only design, in the sense that unlike in the post-test only design where it might be too late for you to get feedback from the trainees to perhaps try to make corrections. With respect to the pre-test, post-test design, you initially administer a pre-test. So, for instance, if I'm administering the pre-test, post-test design for this particular class, it means that the first day we meet, I will administer a pre-test where I will perhaps administer a quiz to test your knowledge in HRD. then your score will be recorded and kept on your file. Now, after taking you through the series of lectures for the semester, at the end of the semester, I will now administer another test, which is the post-test. Record your scores and then put it down. So for us to ascertain whether you have actually learned something, it will depend on your score on the pre-test as well as your score on the post-test. So that if your post-test score is better than the pre-test one, then we say the training program or the HRD intervention was efficacious. And the reverse is true. Now, the last evaluative design is what we call the pre-test, post-test with comparison groups. Pre-test, post-test with comparison groups. So this one, the third one is just like the second one, which is the pre-test, post-test evaluating design. But the only difference is that the third one counts with a comparison group. In other words, in an attempt to administer the HRD intervention, you will divide the class or the trainees into two main groups. And each, whereas the first group might be receiving the actual HRD intervention, the second group will be acting as what we call control groups. So the comparison group here simply means a control group. And this control group will be introduced to a different form of stimuli, which is not necessarily the HRD intervention. So at the end of the day, we will be comparing the initial scores, which is the pretest, of those in the experimental group or the those who took part in the actual HRD class and those who took part in the control group in terms of being exposed to something which is different from the HRD class. Then we'll do a post-test for them and test their knowledge on HRD. Is it clear, especially the third one? Hello. Any questions so far on the evaluative designs?
Yeah, so I would like you to go over the third one again.
The third one, okay, so just a minute. I think it will be easier if I illustrate it for you. So just give me about a minute to set my peripheral up.
All right.
Maybe set it up my peripheral and I illustrate it. Can you all see my screen?
No, sir.
Okay,
No, sir.
Just a minute. Can you say it now?
Yes,
So
the blank.
good. So the third one is pre-test, post-test with comparison group, right? And I'm saying that in this form of evaluation design, you ideally have what you call the experimental group, okay? The experimental group, and then the control group. Versus control group. Now, the experimental group will be the group that will be exposed to the HRD intervention. So in this circumstance, they will be taken through the HRD course, right? So they basically receive the active ingredients. And then the control group will be receiving something which is inactive, what we call a placebo, or something which is not as efficient as the HRD intervention. So let's say a placebo. Now, what happens is that at the pre-test level, so pre-test, the initial scores of the experimental group will be ascertained and recorded. Then the initial scores of the control group will also be ascertained and recorded. This is conducted before you administer the HRD intervention. So at the pre-test level, that is where maybe the first time you met them in class. Those in the experimental group, you administer a short quiz for them to know their level as far as the issue of HRD is concerned. Then those in the control group, even though they are not receiving the HRD intervention, which is the active ingredients, but they are going through some sort of classes, which might be maybe how to do any for instance, how to code in Java or whatever. Okay, something different from HRD intervention. Then it will be recorded. Now, at the post-test level, you will conduct this test after you have administered the HRD intervention. So which means that we have reached perhaps the end of the semester, and you conduct the test again to test their proficiency, and you record the scores too. Those in the control group that are receiving an inactive course, which is different from the HRD intervention, will also be assessed at the end of their program, right? Now, once you do this, we can only say the HRD intervention has been efficacious or successful if the performance of those in the experimental group, that is those who actually went through the HRD class, is higher than those who did not go through the HRD class. In other words, assuming the experimental group now is the informatics students, and the control group now is the engineering students who are not in my class, but in doing other engineering courses. HRD student, IT students in my HRD class were initially given a quiz, and let's say the average score was 2/10. Now, the engineering students who are also going through some sort of engineering, let's say transformers and transistors and whatever, they also scored 2/10 at the pre-test level. Now, I have exposed the IT students or the informatics students to an HRD course for at least 8 weeks. After that, so at the end of the semester, I'll administer a quiz to test their proficiency and mastery of concepts on HRD. Then I'll record their average score over here, assuming, let's say, they get 8 out of 10. I'll administer the same test on the proficiency or mastery of HRD concepts with a control group, which is the engineering students, even though they did not sit in my class or they have not sat for any HRD class. And I'll also record their score here. So these are fictitious figures for illustration purposes. Let's say their score is somewhat 4/10. Then we can conclude that those who took part in the HRD intervention or the HRD program performed much better. And now we can conclude that participating in an HRD program enhances your performance or score on HRD proficiency. So this is a typical example of the pre-test, post-test with comparison group. Now, there can also be another conclusion. So assuming at the post-test level, those who did not sit for the HRD class, they actually score 8. They actually score 8/10, just as those who sat 8 weeks in the HRD class. What will be your conclusion? Who can try?
So
Yeah, Alex, go on.
it means that the inactive group were better than the active ones.
Okay, so that's a nice try. Who can also kill it?
Sir,
Yes, Catherine, go on.
you can say that maybe those people, they are more like they understand more the concept than other group.
Okay, so the understanding is there. Okay, Lord Mensa, try and let me see if you can finish it, correct?
Those who participated in the experiment had 8/10.
Yes.
Those who were not participants had 8/10. In as much as those who were not participants had 8/10 doesn't mean your experiment wasn't done well. So far as they had 8/10, that means they got the understanding. It could be that those who were not part of the experiment already have an initial idea of what was taught, what the others learned, because the average is 8/10, which is good, which is perfect. So to me, I think the experiment was all right, but the inactive ones maybe also had an idea, or maybe they were also exposed to.
Listen to the preamble well. Listen to the preamble well. I'm saying that informative students and engineering students, these are not students that are ideally trained to have higher proficiency in the field of HRD or HRM. So comparatively, they are at the same baseline. Now, the informative students have been taken through some HRD classes for about 8 weeks. And we are seeing that their performance have appreciated from 2 to 8 in terms of the average. Now, the engineering students did not sit in the HRD class. They were doing their own engineering stuff. Okay. But when we administered the same post-test to them, they also scored 8/10. What will be your conclusion?
The conclusion will be that the engineering students were preview or has a previous knowledge or has ever gotten an encounter with the experiment before, or with their engineering experience, that is what they were able to use to do the experiment. or to be able to answer the questions.
Okay, so it's a nice try, but maybe let me put the question this way. Let me put the question, all of you listen carefully. So what would be your conclusion about the HRD intervention that was administered? In other words, will you say the HRD intervention leads to improvements in the performance of participants? Will that be your conclusion? That is what I want to find out.
No, sir.
Who is speaking? Is it Abraham? Why will you make such a conclusion?
Because we are both on the same skill. If I am under training and I have this knowledge, and someone who is not under training also has the same knowledge, then it means there was no transfer of training.
You started well, but the transfer now they are saying. But you are partly right.
Okay.
The thing happening here now is that we started from the outset, we were hypothesizing that participating in a training program should lead to favorable results, and those who do not participate in it will be yielding unfavorable results. Now, at the entry level, we did a pretest, and we saw that before they all partook in the exercise, their score was comparatively the same. Now, this experimental group, that is those who were exposed to the HRD class, are now scoring average of 8/10. Those who did not partake in it are also scoring 8 out of 10, which means something else is happening, and we cannot attribute it to the effect of the HRD intervention. That is the sort of conclusion you can make. Okay, so at this point, kindly mute all your microphones, unless you have a question. William B., please mute your microphone, okay?
Okay.
Unless you want to ask a question, because I'm getting a lot of noise from your end. Yes, Stephen. William B., your microphone is still on.
Sir, yeah, it's because of the noise. That's why I wanted you to mute his voice. William B.
Okay, all right. So, please, is the explanation clear now, or I should take it one more time? So this is a typical example of what we mean by pre-test, post-test with comparison groups. These are the pre-tests, these are the post-tests, and those that are being exposed to the pre-test and post-test are compared with another group which is not being exposed to the HRD intervention. Let me quickly do another example, so maybe that will make it clearer. Can you still see my screen?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And it's blank. Is it blank?
Yeah, it's blank.
Yeah, it's blank.
Good. So, assuming I am now having two groups. So the experimental group, these are just for illustration purposes, and a control group. And in this particular experiment, we want to evaluate whether alcohol impairs recall or memory, so effect of alcohol. So once again, this is just to illustrate for you to understand alcohol on memory. So basically, we are trying to find out whether when one consumes alcohol, it affects the ability to recall what they have learned. So we have the experimental group and then the control group. and the experimental group will be receiving the alcohol. So let's say, how many thoughts, glasses? Then let's say 5 thoughts. Then the control group will be given a placebo, so 5 glasses of water. Although it might look like an alcohol. Now, at the pre-test level, we will administer some tests to them and record their score. So maybe at the pre-test level, the experimental group, their average was 8/10. That is before we administered the active ingredients, which is the alcohol. Their score was 8/10. The control group their score was 8/10. Then we introduced the intervention, which is the alcohol. So 5 glasses of water. Right after this, then we will administer another similar test and record their score. So at the post-test level, it's perhaps dropped to, let's say, 2/10. And over here, it got to 10/10. What sort of conclusion will you draw over here for this intervention? Someone should try for me to see if you are getting it. 7, is your hand up? Okay, Lord Mensa, go on.
So then it means the experiment was quite successful.
Okay, and when you say it was successful, what do you mean exactly?
What I mean is those that were exposed to. Hello, can I talk?
Yeah, go on.
Which means those that were exposed to the alcohol. The effect of the alcohol on the memory was as was expected. So they dropped from 8 to 10. That means the alcohol had an effect on their memory.
On the memory. Very good. Very
yes.
good.
8 to 2, not 10. Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and those that were.
Was someone also trying to make a contribution? Okay, does anyone have a differing opinion? Yes, Catherine.
So you can see those that take the alcohol, their system is weak.
Hey, Mabel, those that took the alcohol, their system is what? Weak. Why would you say their system is weak?
Because then when you do the test, we see the post-test is like the percentage is reducing.
Okay. All right. I get you now. Any other? Moses?
Sir. Yeah, I was just reacting to Catherine's conclusion.
Okay, well, you have a different opinion, Anna.
Okay, from the definitely those who took the alcohol had an effect on, but it will also depend on the certain condition. If the health condition of or the mental condition of those under the control group is the same as those under the other
experimental group. Okay, so those are the things that we call extraneous variables. And so to conduct this kind of experiments, you have to hold all those extraneous variables constant.
Okay.
And I'm sure you've done all these things in your research methods. So, okay, Richard.
I'm struggling to understand why you should add another group to test for the effects of alcohol on a group of people. Why don't you just use that same group for the experiment?
Okay.
Or rather, adding
another group. All right. So the main reason why in HRD evaluation interventions, we sometimes introduce a comparison group or a control group is that we actually want to ascertain whether the HRD intervention we are administering is actually efficacious. In other words, if we want to draw a conclusion that going through the HRD intervention will give you favorable results, then it is anticipated that those who do not go through the intervention should not necessarily experience similar favorable results. So the moment you get differing outcomes from the experimental and the control groups, then you can actually make a bold conclusion that the intervention you introduce is giving you the results that you are receiving. Richard, is it okay?
Yeah, so are they assessed on a common material?
When you say are they assessed on a common material, it depends on the
test.
In the test.
The test that is conducted.
Yes, the test is the same material.
Yes, for both group.
Come again.
It's the same material for both group.
For both group. So that is why I said that your colleagues that are doing engineering now, right? They have not sat through my class for this past 8 weeks or so. Okay. So where is that example, right? Can you see this screen?
Yes.
Okay. So if by the end of the semester, mistakenly, those of your colleagues doing engineering, some of them find themselves on the portal, and I put the end of semester quiz there and they do it. And at the end of the day, their average score is comparatively the same as the average score you are also getting. Then I can't conclude that your performance is as a result of your participation in my class. And this is so because even students who did not sit in my class are also getting comparison results. Is it clear? So at the end of the day, we want to ascertain by boldly saying that the performance of the employees on the job is because of the training program that they went for, but not because of their own maturation or maybe their own history. And that is why I said all those extraneous variables must be held constant. It shouldn't be because the passage of time has given them an opportunity to mature enough to understand some of these things, but we should be able to attribute it directly to the HRD intervention they took part in. And that is why the control group or the comparison group are usually taken through a program which have different objectives from what we are doing. Okay? And at the end of the day, we even expect that because of the differences in the objectives, they should be having a lot of difficulty doing the post-test and scoring low. But if they also end up scoring high over there, then it means that perhaps we need to improve the intervention that we administer. It means there are several reasons why people are scoring this, and we cannot attribute it to only participation in the HRD class. Is it clear now?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Good. And the same can be said about this one. If at the end of the day, those that are taking the 5 thoughts are scoring 2, and those who did not take it are scoring 5, it means that we can confidently conclude the consumption of alcohol impairs memory, because this is the evidence. Those, before they consumed it, this was their score. After consuming it, they are now having a lot of difficulties recalling, and so that is why they are scoring low. But those who did not take the alcohol, but they just took a glass of water, it did not affect their memory, and so that explains why they were scoring 10. Now, conversely, assuming this was what they scored, let me change it quickly. Now, assuming after the experiments, these are the results that we report, what will be your conclusion? So at the pretest level, the experimental group average score was 8/10, the control group 8/10. And after taking the 5 shots of alcohol and 5 glasses of water, the post-test scores of the experimental group was 10/10, and the post-test score of the control group was 2/10. What will be your conclusion for this experiment? Yes, Lord.
Yeah, so
it will still mean alcohol has effect on the memory.
Okay,
but
explain
this
further.
time around, maybe a positive effect.
Precisely. Thank you very much.
Yes, but
Why
sir,
do you say precisely?
Hello, sir.
Yeah, go on.
So, however, what I don't understand is on the other side, it has also dropped from 2 to 10. So could it be that water also has effect on the memory?
So it's the conclusion you can draw for the control group is that consuming
water,
the consumption of water can actually impair memory. And don't forget, these are just fictitious figures. I'm just using it to illustrate.
Sir. Okay, yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Any other question? So that is the pretest post-test with comparison group. If we were to do only the first one, post-test only design, what it means is that we wouldn't have, okay, let me quickly do it. Can you still see the screen?
Yes, sir.
Is it blank?
Yes, please.
Good. So post-test only design. Post-test only design. So that one, you don't need a comparison group. You are only dealing with the experimental group, and there are also no baselines for you to compare their prior competencies. So what happens is that you introduce the HRD intervention, then so that will be for maybe a week or a month or so. Right after that, then you administer the quiz. So that will be the post-test. And you record their score. So if, for instance, the average score at the end of the program is 8/10, you can draw a conclusion that the performance of the trainees is favorable in the sense that 8/10 is above average. Now, the challenge over here is that you will not have any baseline to compare. So how will you know whether their proficiency was even 8/10 before they joined, or whether it was less? And that was why it becomes imperative for you to use the pre-test, post-test. So in pre-test, post-test, what will happen is that you first of all, still you have only one experimental group where you conduct the initial tests. Then you record the score over there. So let me say 3/10. Then you administer the HRD intervention depending on the number of weeks or months. Then right after that, you administer the post-test. Then you record. Assuming at the post-test level, the average score is 2/10. What will be your conclusion as far as the HRD intervention was concerned? Yes. What will be your conclusion? If you administer a pre-test, post-test evaluation design like this, and you end up having a pre-test score of 3/10, but a post-test score of 2/10, what would be your interpretation of this evaluation? Yeah, Ernest.
To mean that the HRD intervention was not efficacious.
Okay, why was it not efficacious?
Because prior to the intervention, they scored higher. And after the intervention, it's expected that they will score better than the post-test should have been better than the pre-test. That should have been the issue.
Very good. And who can tell me the sort of transfer which is happening here and why?
Zero transfer.
Come again.
Zero transfer.
Okay, Richard, why do you say zero transfer?
Because the training has worsened the case.
Okay, and do you think it is called zero transfer?
I think it's negative transfer.
It's negative. You said the thing. It has worsened the case. So how can it be zero? So there's been some impact, except that the impact here is negative. All right. So I think we are now on the same page.
All right. So one question.
Good. What is your name?
I'm Jonas.
So why didn't you label your name properly?
I'm Jonas.
In the system I'm using, I can't see your name well. You have caps.
Sorry, I didn't pay attention to that.
So in future, you have to log in with your...
Okay, I didn't pay attention to that.
All right, go on with your question.
Oh, okay, thank you. Yeah, with the pre-test, post-test, in the instance we have on the screen now,
okay,
with the post-test dropping down to 2/10, is there not the likelihood of other extraneous factors affecting that, not necessarily the HRD intervention making a negative transfer?
Okay, so usually what happens in the administration of these interventions is that during the designing process, we anticipate all the possible extraneous variables which can affect our recording and dissemination of information. And so all those things are preempted and held constant. In other words, they are controlled for. That is why in our interpretations of these evaluations, we do not consider the extraneous variables. It is only in cases where you yourself now, you are aware that even though you forecasted for certain extraneous variables, there were some supervening ones which outweighted you. And for that matter, you can read that meaning into your interpretations. But unless those supervening ones crop up, it is always not appropriate for you to be reading meanings into it. In fact, in some circumstances, if, so for instance, the coronavirus and how it affected last semester's class activities, that one, if a student is failing, okay, if a student is failing, you cannot wholly blame the student because this is a new norm where not only students, but lecturers and all other people globally were trying to adjust to. And so the psychological torture alone did not create the enabling environment for everyone to work as if nothing has happened. So those are what we call the supervening events. And if that is a situation where you find yourself in terms of administering the intervention, then you can read such meaning into your evaluation. Other than that, it is always catered for during the designing of the HRD intervention.
All right. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Ernest Boateng.
Sir,
Ernest,
please
are you in Kumasi?
I'm in Gofordia.
Okay.
Yes, please.
All right.
So looking at the outcome now, can't we also call it like memory decay?
Memory decay.
Yes, please.
Okay. Why will you say memory is decaying over here?
Because after the intervention, it's expected that the performance will be higher, but it dropped rather.
Okay. So if you were doing an experiment to test participants' ability to recall, then we can be making pronouncement about memory decay. But if the focal point of the intervention is not about their ability to recall, but perhaps it was maybe a case study or a role play. Okay, don't forget though, it is not always, when we talk about the test, we are not always talking about sit-down quizzes. It could be a presentation, it could be a role play, it could be a case study that is given to you. It could be even a simulation exercise where you are driving a car for them to assess you. Okay, so it is only when we are testing your ability to recall from memory. That is where you can make readings into memory decay. Okay.
Okay, sir. Thank you.